I know y'all hate spicy romance novels and you want to remove spice from stories, but we need it. And it's very dangerous to try to ask to ban it. And I'm going to explain why. Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. I am Leah, romance author and reader, and I feel like this is a conversation that we have every single year about spice in books. Is it getting out of hand? Smutty readers are, reading brain rot and they just really need to read real books, and how we just really should not have sex in story. And it expands beyond books, right? It goes through all media. We just need to remove sex from media because sex does not make stories better. And I think this line of thinking is very dangerous, and I fear that a lot of you are not putting two and two together. So in this video, I want to break down where we see sex in our stories, the time, the place, the reason. I want to talk about the misuses of sex, because I think that that is a lot of what y'all are seeing, is that people are misusing sex in the stories. And then I want to talk about the dangers of asking to remove sex from the story. So if you want to hear that, come on, let's talk about it. Three of the main genres that we see sex is romance, erotic romance, and erotica. So in romance, the genre conventions, right? You introduce your characters. It's two or more characters who are falling in love. There's usually some external factor that's keeping them apart. Around the halfway mark is usually when there's the first contact. Either it's a kiss, either it's a sex scene, there's something going on. A lot of times there's a third act breakup. I feel like we're moving away from that because a lot of readers have talked about how they don't like it. And then at the end, there's a resolution, there's a happily ever after, there's a happily for now. A lot of times, if a book is missing any of these elements, like if it does not have a happily ever after, it's not a romance, babe. Be in another genre. It's not a romance. But in all of this, sex is optional. It does not have to have sex to be a romance, especially in YA romance. I'm going to say this again. I've said this before on this channel. I'm going to say it again. YA romance should not have sex scenes. YA romance can talk about sex because that is something teenagers talk about and teenagers deal with, but you cannot have graphic, explicit sex scenes in young adult because the target audience is minors. Quick tangent about that, okay? But that's romance. Sex is optional in a romance. In an erotic romance, it has many of the same elements as a romance, but sex is necessary for the development of the romance. If you remove the sex scenes out of an erotic romance, the romance falls apart. So that makes it an erotic romance, right? And then you have erotica, where sex is the whole point. The whole point is about the sex scene. Plot is optional. In an erotica, it's just about sex. I think a lot of the mischaracterization that we're seeing now is based on back in 2018, when Amazon, which is a huge book marketplace, and that is where a lot of erotic content is. In 2018, they started suppressing erotic content. And so a lot of erotic authors were missing out on sales. And so in order to get those sales, they would miscategorize their work not as erotica, but as romance. And as I said, in romance, sex is optional, right? And so now erotica is taking over the romance genre instead of being in the genre it's supposed to be in, erotica. And now we get all of these complaints about how romance is plotless and how it just seems like it's about sex scene after sex scene after. I feel like a lot of that is due to the Amazon suppression and the response to that. And now we're seeing all of this. And I feel like because erotica has infiltrated the romance space, now it's influencing the romance books that are coming out. Because I do agree with a lot of people when they say, I feel like some stories shouldn't have romance. I definitely agree, right? I feel like some stories shouldn't have sex scenes. I definitely agree. I don't think sex scenes are always necessary for romance. As I said before, the romance genre states that sex is optional. It is not necessary, right? But I think because erotica has infiltrated the romance genre, now there's a push to have sex scenes in all romances, right? Now we have books that are pushing romance arcs when I don't think there should be. I think a really good example of this is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. I think that's the title of it, The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. I really enjoyed that book. It has found family, and it's about this woman. I believe her name is Mina. I haven't read it in a while, but I believe her name is Mina, and she was adopted by this witch, and she's going to be a nanny for a group of small witches. And I think what that book did really well was the found family trope, was like her finding her family, and her arc in itself I think was so well done. But that book is categorized as a romance, and I don't think it should be, because I remember getting to the 60% mark and they're like, "Oh yeah, this is a romance. Let's put these two characters together." I'm like, "Why? Why are we doing this?" And I was talking with someone who I went to college. There are a few people that I went to college with who have bookstagrams. And so I was talking with her about it because she also enjoyed the book, but she hated the sex scene in it because she was like, it's such a cozy book that the sex scene really just messed it up. I was like, I feel like the whole romance arc messed it up because it's such a great book without the romance. And she was like, it's a great book without the sex scene. But we both agreed like this book did not need that. But I feel like a lot of people are pushing this because romance is $1 billion genre. People want that romance money. That's one. And two, because erotica has infiltrated the romance genre, now there are certain expectations that, oh, I think readers want more sex in their stories. And that should not be the case. But my main beef with y'all talking about removing sex from stories is that sex is in other types of stories, right? We have sex and horror. This is where people get into a lot of their fears around sex, like rape, like domestic abuse, things like that. The 80s slasher films were really bad about pushing a purity politic, and that usually the slut or the whore, she like gets murdered in the middle of having sex, and then the final girl is like the virgin one, right? They were really bad about doing that. But that is just one genre where we have sex. Another genre is literary fiction, and that is really where we get to talk about the role of sex in our lives, the power dynamics, the way that it develops our character, what it exposes about our character. We get to delve into intimacy and explore the emotional arc. And a really good example of this is Salvage the Bones by Jesmyn Ward. And in there is a sex scene between a 15-year-old girl and her 20-year-old kind of boyfriend. But in that is showing like their feelings towards sex. Like this 15-year-old views sex as this only thing that she can offer the boys around her who are going through a tough time. Like she can help them feel good through her body. And it's not about her own pleasure, it's about theirs, right? Meanwhile, this boy views sex as extractive, right? Because he's 20 and he's after this 15-year-old girl. But that also develops the plot in that he learns that she's pregnant with his baby and he completely rejects her. And that is an essential part of the plot. And so in that way, yes, sex is necessary for the story. The story is about that. It's about so many other things. It is such a beautiful and well done book. I highly recommend it. But it is also about that as well. Recently, I saw another instance of a sex scene is in the sci-fi show Severance. I don't know if anyone has seen it, but I really love this show. And in the first season, it is about these severed employees who have like their brain cut off so that way they have an innie and an outie, and their innie whole life is just work. And their outie just gets to live life and never have to think about work because that's for their innie to deal with. That's not for their outie to deal with. And so in the second season, this may be a spoiler if you're not caught up, I'm sorry. But in the second season, there is a sex scene. And I was listening to the director talk at the end, and he was talking about how the first season was really about childhood for the innies. And then the second season is about adolescence. And it was so important to show the different parts of our adolescence, like rebellion, like intimacy, like exploring that for the first time and figuring out what your wants and needs and desires are separate from your parents and what your parents want for you, which is what the outies want for the innies, right? And so it's a very important part of the character's development, right? Sex matters. Sex is often necessary to develop a plot, a character, or a relationship. I've done this in my own work. I have a short story collection called Apocalypse Still, and in two of those works, the sex scenes are not graphic. I will warn you, because it's more about what the sex means, right? One of those short stories, Entangled specifically, I was thinking about sex in terms of race, power, and violence, and how those intersect, particularly between Black women and white men throughout our history. And so I really wanted to think about like sex as character development, because a lot of people feel like that story was a betrayal to them. But I'm like, there were signs. And one of the signs was the sex scene. And I think at first glance, you can view it as being sensationalism. But no, it served a purpose. A lot of times in my work, sex serves a purpose because sex is a political tool. A Night at Fontaine, some people will view that as being like my least political piece of writing, because it's an erotic romance. And at first glance, it's about these two people who meet up and are very attracted to each other and have sex with each other. But on a deeper level, I wrote that as a political piece against the readers, against the Black readers who hate Black romance because it's too ghetto, too violent, and they think that stories of working class Black people are only struggle and oppression. And I'm like, yes, working class Black people can be oppressed. Yes, they can struggle, but they can still love. They can still be tender and soft with each other. They can still want like care and intimacy. Like these things are not restricted just because you're poor and working class. These things are not reserved for well-off people. And that was something that I wanted to show in that work as well, while also using these identities that are highly, highly criminalized, like sex work and drug dealers. Because in my own life, the drug dealers I know, well, one, most of them are white, but two, the drug dealers I know are not like super violent. They sell drugs to pay their bills and to get their kids like clothes for school and buy groceries and get gas. Like basic living things. The sex workers I know are like super empathetic, very intelligent, and they often talk about how like sex work is one of the only spaces for men to really be themselves, and how men will like rent out rooms just to talk because that's the only place that they can talk. That's the only place that they feel it is acceptable for them. And so a lot of the sex workers I know are highly empathetic people. And so it's like, why are these people criminalized and viewed as terrible when the ones I know, at least in real life, are not? And so these were all of the things that I was exploring in that piece. While, yes, first glance may be like, oh, it's just sex. It's just that. But no, it's deeper than that. It's always deeper than that. So I've talked about people misusing sex scenes before, particularly in Book Talk Has a Problem, but it's not smut. And how, a lot of these writers are throwing in sex scenes for sensationalism, which is fine in erotica. That's not fine for romance. Like romance has conventions, it has things that the reader expects of their romances. And if you just throw in a sex scene for no reason, you're going to break the reader's trust. And so for me, a lot of this is like, I'm looking at authors and being like, you're being highly irresponsible with your job. I think a really good example of this, just thought about this, sorry. A really good example of this is Bridgerton, the TV series, and in season 3, how Penelope is like, wow, writing is actually a real responsibility. I have to take it seriously and wield my pen with integrity, right? That's a lesson for a lot of writers. I get really upset with y'all because you're not writing responsibly. And as a result, readers are losing their trust, and readers are like, oh, maybe it's the sex scene. It's not the sex scenes. It's the people writing. People are calling domestic abuse dark romance when dark romance is supposed to be like serial killers or assassins who fall in love. Like, it's not supposed to be about a man beating a woman up and at the end she's like, I love you. Let's be together forever and have our happily ever after. That's not a romance, babe. Right? That's something you put in women's fiction. That's something you put in book club fiction. That's tragic fiction. That's not romantic. And what does it mean when you keep pushing this agenda that it is? I'm afraid a lot of y'all are not putting two and two together. Like, we see the young men who are being indoctrinated with this right-wing propaganda that says you were supposed to be physically and sexually dominant in your relationships, but we're not seeing the young women who are reading books that romanticize men being physically and sexually dominant with them. Put it together. That's why I'm saying it is so dangerous to not have nuance in your critiques. If you are a reader who does not want smut in your stories, I think that's fine. I'm on your side, actually. If you want to be forewarned, I agree. Like in a lot of my erotic romances, I put intended for 18 plus only. That is a very clear signal. Like, bro, we got sex, we got fucking in this story. Okay. Very clear signal to the audience. I do agree with you. But to go across the board and say, we just need to remove all the sex because I'm tired of seeing it, that is extremely dangerous. Where I live in the United States, I live in Mississippi, porn is currently banned, right? Can't go to www.balesa.co, can't see no videos. Or the big screen that's like, oh, we can't show it in your state. Pornhub, can't see nothing. Can't see nothing. Unfortunately. But I think a lot of people will see that and think, oh, that's okay. Porn is gross and violent. Who wants to see that? This is a good thing. It's not. Where we live in the United States, people are using this as an incentive to ban other things. It's not just like, oh, let's get rid of all pornographic material. No, they get to decide what's sexually explicit. And what they have decided is sexually explicit is books that tell kids what their body parts are, books that tell kids what consent is, books that tell kids what their gender identity is, books that tell kids what is rape and what is not, right? These are the books that are being banned from the shelves currently. Books that show kids what is pedophilia, what to do if someone who is older than you is doing certain things, how to spot grooming. Those books are being banned. Now they are sexually explicit. They're under this pornographic and obscene label. And so what happens is kids grow up not knowing about their bodies. Kids grow up not only not knowing what safe and good and healthy sex looks like, they also don't know what bad sex looks like. They don't know what unhealthy sex looks like. They don't know what consent is. They don't know how to ask questions during sex. They don't know how their bodies work. I think I've said that before. They don't know how to protect themselves during sex. They have no resources. And we have to think about what that means in the same country that is restricting access to reproductive care, that is restricting information to reproductive care, right? And they're banning any sort of information that's telling you how your body works, how to protect yourself, how to go into sexual situations and be safe. And they're doing that based on your fear, based on your disgust when it comes to sex in our stories. We need media that discusses sex because it makes us all safe. And yes, sometimes that include having graphic sex scenes, because in those graphic sex scenes is often the only place that a lot of readers can learn about how do I ask for consent? What do I say during sex? How do I use a condom? Like, what sort of protection should I be doing? How do I go about? This is often the only framework that readers have, are romance novels. And that's very fucking sad, but that's the reality of the world that we live in. Can it be cringe and make you uncomfortable? Yes. I also think that that is something that you need to work through yourself. I don't know what it is about people who view their discomfort as being everybody else's problem. I will say this. I think a lot of it goes back to like discomfort equals demonic. Anything that makes me uncomfortable is demonic. It's not, babe. There are some things that should make us uncomfortable, right? Pedophilia makes me uncomfortable because it should. Adults need to stay away from children. And that includes teenagers, you weirdos. But fighting to get sex out of romance books is not the way. Romance is supposed to be this genre where we go to learn more about healthy and unhealthy relationship dynamics. It's often the only place that a lot of people in the United States are able to get this information. That's why I think it's highly, highly irresponsible when romance authors are mixing sex and violence and they're calling it romance and they're calling it love. I think that's so incredibly irresponsible because, as I said earlier, you're just indoctrinating the kids the same way that red pill theology indoctrinates the boys. Unfortunately, we live in a world where getting rid of sex in our media would not have a positive outcome. We can push to create the world, but that required y'all actually doing something and doing work and not just getting online and complaining about it. That required you going into your communities and doing work to make sure that people are getting the access and the information they need to have sex safely. That means calling out your pedophilic uncle. That means calling out your cousins and your friends who are date raping people, who are being violent sexually. That means calling out the girlies that are reading these books that's like, this man is so cute, even though he's physically and sexually assaulting this woman. Isn't that so romantic? No, it's not, babe. It requires us actually doing work to get there. And so just saying we need to ban sex, it's not enough. It's not enough, and it will not protect children. It will not protect children. It will not protect women. It will not protect sex workers. It will not protect queer people. It will not protect the most marginalized of us. It will actually make us unsafer. We need sex. We need it. We need to talk about it. We need to have open discussions about it. We need to show it. We need sex. Because my hypothesis, and my hypothesis, they aren't always right. But my hypothesis is that if we continue to push to remove sex from media, they will remove all sex from media. But I would not be surprised if the only depictions we have left are depictions that romanticize rape and sexual assault and pedophilia. I wouldn't be surprised. Right? And so that's why I'm telling you right now, you gotta quit it. You gotta stop with the let's get rid of sex. Let's call out the weirdos, but the sex is not the problem. It's the way that it is being wielded. And we can call that out. Okay? So let's stop it. I don't want to hear no more. I don't want to hear no more. Sex is not bad. But some people and the way they're using it is very irresponsible. I do agree. So that's all I have for y'all. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.